On today's show, the man which epitomizes our show slogan, interviewing baseball's greatest minds who love to challenge the status quo, a pioneer in the world of baseball science with growing, breaking discovery of effective velocity, including EV pitch tunnels, location-adjusted speeds, and many deceptive metrics. On a side note, he also was the first one to introduce the tubing in the baseball world. The man behind what's called Hitting is a Guess, played college ball, pro ball, drafted by the Twins, been on the show many times, MLB Network also. Fasten your seatbelts, one of the best in the business. Actually, I should say the best in the business. Welcome, my good friend, Perry Husband. What's up, Perry?
How are you, Pete? Thanks for having me.
Hey, thank you. And I'm sure some of our guests know, actually on Facebook Live, know what happened. So there's always a first in real life. And but we will, we're past that and ready to rock and roll. Perry, do us a favor, just, for everybody, give us a basic understanding of EV, and then go ahead and start the presentation, and then we'll have questions and answers also with it.
Okay, I'm going to try this again. I don't know if I did that.
Yep.
Yeah, I can see it real good.
Okay. So effective velocity, guys, is from the moment the ball leaves the pitcher's hand. It's measured at the moment of release. The average is around 54 feet. Some guys are more than that. Some guys are higher. Some guys are lower. Doesn't really matter. Wherever the point of release is at, from that moment, everything that happens to the baseball is measured by effective velocity. So effective velocity is basically EV 101 is the idea that location adjusted speed. Everywhere you throw the pitch within the reach of the hitter changes the reaction time because it changes his reach. A hitter is basically focused on middle fastball. In fact, I'm going to go to this next one. And I want to show you this idea. We'll see. I'm going to try to back this up and do it one more time. When you see this baseball coming down, it's basically representing the bat. And so the bat, when it starts into the motion of hitting, it's going to get to a place somewhere back in here where you can see that the bat is aiming towards left field. When it's somewhere in around bat number 40 or whatever that is, 35, it's for a ball that's hit up the middle. And then when it's in here, it's a ball that's going to be pulled. So when you see how this works, these are 3 different pitches in 3 different locations at 3 different speeds. Yet this one swing, the timing of that one swing is going to run into all 3 of those pitches. This would be the equivalent of 93. This would be about 90, and this would be about 87 if they're all on that same basic plane. So middle away, middle, and kind of middle in. And so what effective velocity is it's that understanding of adding or subtracting speed depending on where the location of the pitch is. So that's probably the hardest thing for people to really kind of wrap their head around. If we look at this next one, you can see that from the time this bat starts down into this motion at about 0.096 seconds, it's going to run into this 93-mile-an-hour fastball out here. At about 0.112 seconds, it's going to run into this ball that's at 90 miles an hour. And then at 0.134 seconds, which is about the average time that it takes for a hitter to swing, which is roughly a third of the way to the plate. So 1/3 of the pitch flight is taken up by the hitter's swing if he hits the ball all the way out here. If he hits it back here, obviously it takes a little bit less time. So regardless of whether you look at this from baseballs added or bats taken away, however you kind of look at it, adjusted location is the speed that it would be if this one swing was going to run into it. So this is kind of representation. The softballs, the bigger softballs would represent me personally. That's my 100% swing arc. So when I make a swing, if I'm going to hit the ball on the outside part of the plate, let me grab that laser pointer. If I'm going to hit a ball on the outside part of the plate as a lefty hitter, that's the place that I'm going to make contact if I'm going to hit it at 100%. The idea of 100% is, in EV terms, we call it 100-100. And it's really 100-100-100, which is three things have to happen for a hitter to hit a ball absolutely perfect. The first thing is that they have to make their A swing. They have to make their 100% most mechanical version of their swing. Number two, they have to time the pitch perfectly. And number three, they have to take the round baseball and square it up with the round bat. So both of those centers have to meet in order for perfect contact to happen. And that's what EV is based off of. It's not based off of pulling your hands in and making contact in any location. It's the one where you get fully locked out and you max out every bit of energy that the hitter has. That's the 100-100 contact point. So EV is measured off of that. So the world in general has a tendency to try to get squared up on this pitch. They get locked out and extended on the pitch that's away. But this little arc is what is representative of what the world kind of thinks of when they say stuff like, I want you to look away, but I want you to adjust in. And so what ends up happening is they bring their hands in order to be able to adjust to that pitch. The problem is that the second that happens, the exit velocity goes down dramatically. And it's, in the case of someone like Mike Trout, he loses about 20 miles an hour of exit velocity over a 5-year period. His average exit velocity in that up and in part of the strike zone that he's bringing his hands in is in the 80s, and it's around 83 over that 5-year period. In fact, the league is exactly that. They're at 83 to 84 at times, but by and large, that philosophy is something that that costs the hitter from going from a major league hitter down to a high school hitter, because most high school hitters are in that 83, 84 range, or a little bit higher than that, depending on obviously the level. There's some 100-mile-an-hour kids in high school, but the average kid in high school is somewhere between 79 and 82 off the tee. That's in general. And so this philosophy of adjusting the swing in order to make contact on that inside pitch is something that effective velocity would just say simply, thank you. If that's your approach, then I want to throw to 9 of those hitters, because that's the philosophy that will help me as a hitter or as a pitcher strategize against, because that's immediately a weakness. So my number one job as a pitcher is to try to take hitters and take them to a point where I can get away from that 100-100 contact, because that's where all the damage happens.
Hey, Perry, let me just jump in real quick before you go to the next screen. There was a question about, from Zach Castro saying, so stay true to your mechanics, but it's a pitch recognition adjustment, correct, in regards to the Mike Trout example?
Yeah, in general, Major League Baseball's philosophy, most hitters have that basic philosophy of see the ball deep, let the ball get deep, try to get extended on that outside pitch. But when the pitch is to the inside, they try to adjust their swing in order to accommodate that. There are other ways to do it, and there are other players there are some players, but it's very few that don't do it exactly that way. But that's the premier way that most guys do it. And Mike Trout's one of those guys. He doesn't get extended on that pitch. He pulls his hands in to try to bring the barrel in closer to buy himself more time. So instead of that pitch that's at 93, the average major league speed, middle in it's going to be around 95.5, and up and in it's going to be around 98. So to hit 98, the contact point has to go all the way out to this ball. But they're trying to save that time, and they're cheating their swing mechanics in order to pull that off. So that's the idea of what the average hitter is doing. I mean, not that Mike Trout is average in virtually any other way. That's the one real serious, I don't know if you'd call it a flaw. It's just his approach at trying to handle that pitch.
Hey, folks, please mute your mics so we don't get any background noise. Perry, something interesting you said. I was looking at it and I'm thinking, wow, you said Major League Baseball should cut. And tell me if I'm wrong here, if I read it wrong. Major League Baseball should cut their fastballs about 50% or less, and only 2 or 3 teams did it, I believe, last year.
Well, in 2003, when I wrote the books, the Downright Filthy Pitching books, my suggestion was that you should throw about 50% fastballs, because that immediately makes it way more difficult for hitters to predict. The norm at that time was somewhere between 60 and 75% fastballs. So baseball virtually laughed at that. But last year, there were only 2 teams over 50%. There might have been 3, but everyone was right around 52% or less of the amount of fastballs that they're throwing. Really? And the reason that's important is because they're starting to come around to the idea of effective velocity. There's a bunch of things that have happened. At that time, elevated fastballs were happening about 30 to 32% of the time. And now that number is, with some clubs, it's virtually doubled. So those kinds of things are starting to happen. The pitch mix concept is starting to happen. You're going to see a lot of things start to happen. When it all happens, when pitchers completely start to buy into effective velocity, you're going to see some crazy things happen to hitters' numbers. They're not ready for what's about to happen. The next chess set, or the next chess move that happens on the pitcher side is going to be devastating, because pitchers are throwing harder, but they're not using it as effectively as they should. The average fastball is still away. Even though this is the first season since I started studying it in 2003, it's the first season that there were more fastballs up and in the strike zone by 1%. It was like 18% fastballs up and in versus 17% fastballs down and away. In days of old, it was double the amount of fastballs down and away in the strike zone versus up and in. There's a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. This is the fastball use. And if you could picture this being right-handed batter. So the right-handed batter is here, and the pitch is coming inward. So all of these, the number up here, 74, would be extreme up and in just out of the strike zone. So this is from 2016, 17, 18, and 19 separate. And this is all of them together. As you can see, this is fascinating to me, because it should never be like this. It should never be so predictable that it's in the 70s in here every single year. It's in the 80s in here in that up and in box every single year. It's virtually the same in these 2 boxes. It's virtually the same all along that diagonal, because along that diagonal is where the radar gun is the same as the reactionary time. And that's why the speeds, the exit velocities, are always really close to the same. And the exit velocity that's the highest is almost always every single year right here. So if the average Major League fastball is 93, this is the average, then the average use of that Major League fastball is around 90. And so the hardest hit balls are happening right around 90. The average speed for homers is 89 miles an hour. So right around 90 miles an hour is where all of the hard hit balls happen. I don't want to jump around too much, but to me, this is super important, because every year it's exactly the same. And it doesn't matter whether you look at lefties or righties, it's exactly the same. The epicenter for hard hit balls is middle down or middle away. It's one of those single year. The lowest is always up and in, and there's always about somewhere between a 7 an 11-mile-an-hour difference in exit velocity between up and in and down and away. That's one of the factors that helps to support the idea that there's a 10-mile-an-hour difference between a fastball thrown up and in and a fastball thrown down and away. There's a 10-mile-an-hour reactionary difference because that's how much reach differential there is if they were to hit both balls perfect.
Perry, you and I have talked about this, and I want to throw you two things at you. So myths, one of the myths would be, or two actually, one that ground balls are not necessarily bad, and I know you'll explain that. And two, pitching at the knees, that's something that, we used to teach 20, 30 years ago. Still, some guys say, keep it at the knees, good and bad, but that's not always true, right?
No, in fact, if you're focusing your pitching approach on getting ground balls, to me that it's such a flawed concept out of the gate, because at the big league level, ground balls that are hit at 90 miles an hour have about a 380 batting average. At 95 miles an hour, which is the cutoff for hard hit balls, what they call a hard hit ball, the batting average is around 390. And at 100 miles an hour, the ground ball is at 430 plus. It's 435 one year. So 430 is the batting average on ground balls that are hit hard. And 380 is the batting average on ground balls that are hit at a low speed of 90 miles an hour. And everybody, I think, knows about the concept of a topspin curveball. They've done a study and found that because the top spin of the curveball, when the bat hits it just underneath center, it keeps the spin going and it turns right into backspin. And so there's no energy loss at impact. Well, the opposite of is true. It's the same concept, but a backspin fastball, when you hit the top of the center, it's going to continue that same spin also. So when you look at ground balls that happen on low fastballs, the exit velocity is usually around 6 miles an hour faster than that player's overall exit velocity anyway. So the reason for that is just because there's no loss of energy in those ground balls. So getting ground balls on fastballs down seems like it's a good idea on the surface, but in reality, to me, it sets up a very bad precedent, because number one, that pitch is in the speed that the hitter is most geared to for their entire career. They've been focused on away fastball speed their whole life. And so when you live with fastball away, I'm going to do a YouTube video coming up pretty soon on the 25 reasons why fastball away is the worst pitch to focus your approach around. And there's legitimate 25 reasons. A couple of them are the baseball is going down at more of an angle that matches the bat. The average bat is going to be somewhere between 5 and about 15 degrees in general. The fastball at the top of the strike zone is about 2 degrees downward to 3 degrees, sometimes 4. It depends on the angle of release and velocity, but in general, the fastball is around 2 to 3 degrees or slightly downhill, right? At the bottom of the zone, though, it's somewhere around 7 or 8 or 9, depending on, again, the release point and the movement and all kinds of other factors. But in general, it's probably around 7 or 8. And so as soon as I start throwing fastballs down, I'm going to match the bat that's going up with the line of the pitch that's going down. And so instantly, I'm already creating an accidental contact that's waiting to happen. The highest exit velocity is down there. The highest batting average is down there. The highest WOBA, the highest slugging percentage. Every number is higher on fastballs that are kind of middle away, down and away, down and middle, than they are in that up and in part of the strike zone. So that's a gigantic myth that keeping the ball down and keeping the ball away is safer. Is completely not accurate.
Perry, a couple of things. I'm going to add a couple, and folks, type your questions, or if you want to raise your hand and unmute your mic, that's fine also. Here's the thing. On the show, this is what's unique about the show. We got coaches all levels, different countries all over the world, and, you know, different situations. Everything you're talking about, they can apply at any level, correct?
Yes. It's easy is actually, it's really hard to explain, but it's super simple at the core of it. It's basically controlling timing. And so if you're a 8-year-old kid and you're throwing nothing but fastballs, and you understand that there's a difference of throwing fastballs away versus throwing fastballs middle in versus throwing fastballs up and in, each one of those locations changes the reaction time. So if I can teach an 8-year-old kid, and every kid can do this, trust me. If you have a radar gun and you're working with any level player, what you'll find, and this is from Ron Wolforth, this was a trick that I learned from him. You have them throw a pitch, and you tell them what the speed was, and then you ask them to take off a couple miles an hour. And after about 4 or 5 pitches, and them feeling what it's like, and then you asking them to add or subtract a couple miles an hour, they're amazingly good at being able to add or subtract that speed. So if you got an 8 or 10-year-old kid, they're excellent at this drill. And so as soon as you teach them how to throw, let's say they throw 48, and you teach them to throw 46 away and 48 when they go in, the speed differential is dramatically different. There's the 46 turns to about 42, and the 48 turns to about 52. So by taking just a couple miles an hour off, they're going to end up with about an 8 or 10 mile an hour speed differential when they hit those 2 locations. So learning the zone is something that any 8 or 10-year-old kid should do immediately. Mm-hmm. That's the number one thing with effective velocity is learning the zone. That would be EV 101.
Absolutely. And let's go ahead and take a couple questions. One, Mark Fuller, Hall of Fame coach, Wisconsin high school. You know, Perry's latest research still goes along that the hardest hit balls tend to be within 6 miles per hour each. That's something you had said, I believe. And also the second part of it is now has a new emphasis on high fastballs affected. How has the new emphasis on fastballs affected the mechanics of the swing plane?
Well, even though guys are throwing harder, they're still throwing the ball away. I don't know if I have an example of that. I think I do. This is fastball up and in versus down and away. You can see batting average, WOBA, ex-WOBA. Every number is significantly higher on pitches at the bottom of the strike zone versus up and in. But let me see if I have in this one those basic locations. So this is the fastball location of the team that had the highest team ERA, well over 5. They gave up the most homers. And when you look at this, it's pretty amazing. But their focal point, the heat map, is exactly in the middle of the plate, right in the middle of the zone. Mm-hmm. And I'm certain they're not trying to do that. But what ends up happening is guys trying to move the fastball all over the zone end up missing in the middle a lot. And so this is one of those things that is kind of hard to wrap your head around in the beginning, because nobody's going to try to throw that, but that's what ends up happening with the misses. When guys are throwing harder, yet they're throwing, their locations are middle away, which in general, when you look at every team, this is basically how they use their fastball. It's kind of like here. Some of the better teams are more like up and away. Nobody is really using it at absolute max. So even though they're throwing harder, they're not using it in the place that's maxing that out. Not at least not as a team. There are certain guys that are doing that.
Did somebody have something there they wanted to say? Oh, we're good. Perry, Ian McDonald, University of Charleston, says, in your opinion, why don't pitchers pitch up in the zone more consistently? Correct me if I'm wrong, but pitches outside the strike zone are called strikes more consistently in the bottom 1/3. Could this be why?
That's part of it. A a little bit of that, I think, is another myth, because in general, I will agree that games that I've watched, especially at the collegiate level, they're going to give that ball a little bit off the plate because guys have been doing it for 100 years, right? And so they're used to seeing that pitch out there a lot. And for some reason, they don't give this pitch as much. But every umpire has a strike zone, right? Whatever that strike zone is. And where my where this thing is at right now, let me see if I can turn that into a pen. Let's just say that the umpire's strike zone is more like this. It doesn't really matter what the umpire is calling. The EV speeds are still going to be the same within whatever that guy is saying that the strike zone is. So yes, I understand there are some umpires that are going to give lower pitches. There are some umpires that are going to give balls a full ball off the plate, and they won't give the strike that's right here on the black, and they won't give the ball that's right here at the top. But there is a top of their strike zone, and there is a limit to what they will give on this inside part of the plate. And you just have to adjust accordingly. But at the end of the day, the fastest pitch that you can get away with is the one that you want to try to use. Because once I start to establish the fastest fastball, all of the numbers change, because now, because the fastest version is going to be elevated, and the elevated fastball is going to allow me to hide the slider, hide the curveball, hide the changeup. And so I'm going to create more deception. I'm going to create bigger spreads, and I'm going to create a faster reaction time. Meaning, in every study ever done in the police department, when you take away time, people make bad decisions, because as soon as that time goes away and they're forced to make a super quick decision, the decision's never quite as good. And the same thing is true in hitting. The second you speed up that process, you force hitters to have to make a speedier decision, and they're never as good.
Man, I'll tell you what, we got some great questions, and I don't know, top of my head, I was just thinking, are we trying to fool the hitter more than we are the umpire? Is that missaid?
Yeah, let me say one more thing about this idea too. At the big league level, and I am absolutely certain it's the same in college, but at the big league level, this ball above the strike zone has about a 45% chase rate, up to 65 or 70 or 75%, depending on the hitter. And so there's almost a 50-50 shot that the hitter's going to swing at this, regardless of whether the umpire calls it a strike or not. It's almost irrelevant what the umpire calls, because the hitter is going to chase it so often that even if you miss up above that zone, you're going to get the swing a lot, versus about a 16 or 17% chase rate in these areas that are down and away, because they see them out of the hand almost immediately. So there's a
oh, go ahead.
It's more than double the chase rate at the top of the zone.
Perry, another question. Greg Bronze from Saskatoon, Canada, great program there, great coach. In your opinion, and this question comes up a lot, what's a good spread between your fastball and changeup as far as velocity, and maybe even other pitches?
It totally depends on how you're going to use it. If you're going to use it, let me see if I can find a better example.
Man, you're good at this stuff.
This was one that just kind of shows all of the teams that have a +5 ERA in Major League Baseball. This is the way they use their four-seamers. And you can see that the focus, this would be for a right-handed hitter, their focus is away. And it's just as simple as that. That's just the way that it's being done. What was the question again? I'm sorry, I kind of got
the difference in speeds. What should they be between a fastball changeup, a fastball, and I added curveball, or any other pitch?
Okay, so let's assume that you got a right-handed pitcher, and you got so it's going to have a little arm side run here. So let's say that this is their fastball that's going to run to the inside part of the plate. Okay, if their changeup has the same movement and it's going to end up down and in, it's going to end up on that diagonal where the speed is what the radar gun says. So let's just say that the fastball's 90 So when it's up and in extreme, it's going to be about 94, 95. And this changeup, let's say it's 84. So it stays at 84 if it's on that diagonal, but as soon as it starts to go up a little bit, it ends up being 85, 86. And so it starts to become right around 10 miles an hour. It starts to become a little bit shaky if guys are missing their location a lot. If they're not going to use it in the strike zone, then the speed doesn't matter nearly as much. A lot of guys in today's game are throwing this fastball away, and then they're throwing their changeup down below the strike zone at, you know, if they're throwing 94, 93, they're throwing as hard as 90 with the changeup, but they're using it almost exclusively down below the strike zone. We could get into a lot of stuff like that. We could go down a rabbit hole for a long time talking about the strategy behind that. But the in general, you want to try to keep 10 if it's on the same side. So if it's righty and you've got a 94 EV fastball, then you want to keep your changeup at 84 or less. The magic number for EV is 6, but that's if you throw it fairly precisely. That kind of brings me to a point that I think is super important. One of the other questions I get all the time is, man, this all sounds great, but my guys just can't hit those spots. They're not that good.
Yep.
And I'm going to tell you that if you have pitchers that can execute 1 in 3 pitches, in other words, if I set up a zone right here that's this big, if you imagine this is about the size of a small beach ball, can every one of your pitchers hit a beach ball? And if the answer to that is no, then we shouldn't be talking about learning strategy yet. We should be trying to figure out how to control our fastball to the point where we can throw it in that general area. But if you can throw your pitches in a general area, let's say you throw fastball as a righty in that general area, slider, and a changeup all coming out of the same tunnel. If you can hit those 3 areas, what you're going to find is that the speed differentials will hold true way more often. So that, in other words, the pitch will be what the pitch was intended to be. And you're going to find that if they can just execute pitches inside that huge area, you're going to get a boatload of chases. So, for example, like we said, about 40 to 45% of the time, if I miss my fastball up above the zone, I'm going to get that chase. So even though I tried to throw it in the strike zone, I missed, I didn't execute that, I'm going to get strike 1 a fairly high percentage of the time. And then I try to throw a perfect strike down and away with that slider, and I miss. Well, my chase rate down here is super high also. It can be in the 75 percentile range, depending on how good that tunnel is. And then, so now I've thrown 2 pitches. I didn't execute either one of them, and I'm in an 0-2 count. And so now I can throw the next pitch or 3 and not even go into the strike zone. I could throw another pressure pitch. I could try to throw another slider pressure pitch. So executing pitches does not have to be precise. You just have to manage your misses. You have to know, and most guys don't even think about this. I would do day 1 with every pitcher I have, with every pitch that they have. I'm going to do a map, and I'm going to find out if I put a box right in the middle of a strike zone, how often can you execute that pitch dead middle? And I'm going to tell you that the answer is a lot less than most guys will think. Most guys think they can throw that a lot in that middle box, but in reality, they're going to miss. And where are they going to miss? They're going to miss all over the zone. But there's going to be a tendency for them to miss either arm side, or they're going to pull the ball. So there's a map that each guy creates. So one of the big tricks to understanding how to get more command from an EV perspective is to learn what the misses are doing. You know, like a golfer, if you got a green that this big and the stick is here and you got trouble in front, right? The golfer is going to aim right there. And then if the ball fades a little bit, it fades towards the hole, but he's going to go to the safest part of that green. And the same thing is true with pitching. If you know that 6 out of 10 times you're going to miss arm side in this basic area, then you aim here knowing that you're going to be in an area that's gaining speed. So command is something that is, I think, completely misunderstood when it comes to effective velocity. You don't have to be anywhere near perfect in order to be able to control the timing of the at-bat.
You know, Perry, that might add, let's see if it answers this question. What advice would you give to a pitcher who is afraid of throwing strikes because he feels his pitches are going to be hit too hard?
I wish I had this video queued up. I have a video that I used to show from way back, like in the early days of this. Roy Oswalt, and it was one after another, after another, after another, after another, belt-type fastballs, 62 of them in a row. And all of them are fouled off, swung and missed, taken for a strike, popped up, all weak contact. And you would think that I saved those over like a year's period of time. It was 2 outings. Because once you realize as a pitcher that you know the science and you know that the hitter is geared to this area, you know they're geared right here, and you know that if you execute a pitch on this side of that diagonal, that they're going to be late a huge percentage of the time, your confidence goes up dramatically, and you're going to see some amazing things happen to guys' ability to spot pitches. Because as soon as they know the science, because how many times have guys gone out to the mound, they've taken all their deep breaths, they've mentally gotten to the right place, they've centered themselves, they made a perfectly executed fastball down and away, and it gets rocked. So now in their mind, they're like, what the hell just happened? I just did everything perfect, and now all of a sudden, that ball got killed. And it's because it was the wrong pitch at the wrong time. And so no matter how perfect they execute it, they got a negative result. When they start understanding what's causing the hard hit balls and the science behind it, you're gonna see some amazing things happen to their ability to command, because most of their command is based around fear of contact. And when they understand what's causing it, I'm not going to say it goes away, but their command gets tremendously better.
That question came from Paul Gonzalez, our good friend in Peru. I know Perry's been there, done some great work there. Perry, I got a question from Argentina. Partially could have been answered, but let's see. Won't the efficiency of a fastball away pitches depend on how they pair with the rest of the repertoire and the tunneling effect? What he means is if I have a slider and my fastball come from the same spot and travel the same tunnel in the first third of the way, I might be more efficient when pitching inside with my fastball. Marcello from Argentina.
There's a lot of debate about this. Dallas Keuchel, who I helped Brent design his approach when he first got there with the Astros, he won a Cy Young focusing on fastball away. It's not impossible. But what he did, if you bear with me a little bit here, he's a lefty, and let's just say we're talking about righty hitters. So we have my stick man in here. So he's throwing a fastball that looks kind of middle, and then it works its way to the outside. So it ends up being at about 84 EV miles an hour, because he's like 87, 88. And so he's gonna throw that pitch right there. And then he's going to throw a changeup off of that's going to move off the plate, a slider that's going to move off the plate, even a curveball that's going to move off the plate down below the strike zone. And so tell me what's wrong with this picture. 4 out of the 5 pitches are out of the strike zone, right? They all look perfect. They got great tunnels. I mean, amazing tunnels, especially Keuchel. Zach Greinke has that same approach. But that approach has a flaw. And the flaw is, if I understand what's going on here, I'm going to be in a 2-1, 3-1 count way more often than I'm going to be in an 0-2 count if I don't chase all these pitches outside the zone. And when you see those guys get in trouble, that's what you're seeing them do. So yes, there are times when this will work, but I'm just going to say that this is the B option. That same approach, if you can't attack the strike zone with at least 2 pitches, maybe even 3, then it's not your best approach. You need to be able to attack the strike zone with more than 1 or 2 pitches. That's why that's, to me, a B option.
Fantastic. Go ahead, Perry. I know you had something else you wanted. I've got some questions, but we'll hold off. I know you wanted to continue a couple other things.
I wanted to see if we can get this to play. Yeah, because this is what's called an ecosystem. And so this is Blake Snell, fastball up and in, slider away. And so the EV of that 96, 97 fastball is going to end up being well over like 101, somewhere in that range. But the slider away is going to be 20 miles an hour difference. So the odds that a lefty is going to be on time for either one of those is very, very difficult. They have to absolutely sit on one or the other. This great ecosystem does, and then of course you have the curveball in the dirt, which I'm going to guess has well over a 60% chase rate with him during that season that he was amazing. But what you're witnessing here is when pitchers do this, when they set themselves up with an ecosystem where they can attack the strike zone in a couple different ways, it makes hitting so difficult, because what do? You sit on fastball, but all 3 of these pitches look like that fastball. They look almost exactly like that fastball for a super long period of time. And so when you look at what he did that year, he was one of the few guys, if you look at his epicenter of fastball, it was above the diagonal. So he went from being a good pitcher, but when he was focused away, when his heat map focused away, he was a good pitcher. But now when you look at the way he's doing it now, or the way he did it in 2018, you can see a very distinct use of each pitch. Very, very distinct. And that fastball was up, which hides the slider or the curveball, and then hides the changeup. And so whenever he hits any one of these 3 locations, then he knows he's got a really good tunnel with those pitches. He also knows he has a really good speed differential. And so one of the misnomers about pitching is that, man, I got to use my fastball all over the zone. I got to change the hitter's eye level. I got to throw up, down, in and out. I got to move his feet. And I'm just going to tell you that most of that is not proven. When you look at, I mean, granted, moving the feet on occasion puts a little fear in a hitter. There's some reason behind that. There's some reason when you say moving the eye level. I don't want to throw a fastball up and a fastball down to move the eye level. I want the eye level in one place, because what hitters are seeing when they face Blake Snell is they see one thing, and then this party favor comes out of it. So I want everybody sitting in that same exact location all the time. I want their eyes to be in one location. And now when I want to throw a pitch outside of that, it's going to have a really strong tendency to freeze guys. But if I move the zone all over the place, this is one of the things I wanted to make sure I covered. If Blake Snell went back when he was throwing red all over the place, the fastball, it's like if you and I play chess and we're both beginners. We know how the pieces move, but that's it. No strategy. We're both going to make really good moves, really bad moves, really great moves, really awful moves. The problem is neither one of us know what's what. So there's zero chance that we can predict who's going to win, because we don't have – it's random. All of the movements that we're making are all random. And so it's impossible to know what's going to happen. And that's a lot like what's going on with when a pitcher is mixing pitches all over the place. Because the second I take that fastball from this plus location and I move it to the minus, it's no longer a fastball. It's now a medium fastball. It's now a different kind of pitch. And so what if I throw that slider a little bit higher this time? And so now they end up blurring the pitch type. The hitter doesn't really care what the type of the pitch is. All they care about is what does it look like and what's the speed of it and is it in my bat path. So when you start to blur the use of the pitches and you create chaos doesn't help the pitcher. It helps the hitter 100%. Because now you're throwing pitches like that very first thing that we showed, where the barrel can run into slow or really fast out here, medium here, and softer in here. So that chaos is bad for pitching. You want to create stuff that looks like this, because when you start looking like this, your pitches start looking the same. You start bringing the eyes to one location. And then when I want to throw that weird curveball or the fastball away, it's a freeze. And it has a really high, it's going to work. I mean, you see a lot of pitches out here, even though the epicenter's here. He throws some out here because you need to freeze guys. But when pitchers really understand what they're doing, they're going to do this less. They're going to throw this pitch way more. They're going to throw this pitch way more. And they're going to throw this pitch more sparingly, because that's the use of it. The tool of a fastball is to be fast and to create a tunnel that the fastest pitch is on, so that the slower pitches will come off of those and maintain that their biggest spread.
Well said. Hey, I got to jump on this and ask you, because as you know, the show's called Baseball Outside the Box, and we love to challenge the status quo. I got to ask you, the misinformation, the worst thing out right now that's misinformation, what is it? How do we address this?
Well, there's a ton. I mean, like we covered early, the ground ball concept of focusing your attention on trying to get ground balls is a really bad idea. That it's flawed, because there's so many things that go with trying to throw your fastball away in order to try to get that. So the idea that fastball away is safe, total myth. The idea that fastball away, I mean, in the old days, think about this. When pitchers threw 80% fastballs, 40, 30 years ago, even 20 years ago, some guys threw 80% fastballs. The only way you can change speeds is moving the ball up, down, in, and out, right? And so that's where that concept came from, was because that changes speeds. And so when you have a little second baseman back in the day that in his wildest dreams is never going to hit an opposite field bomb, then outside fastballs were safer, because guys are not doing damage on those pitches. The days of that are pretty much over when it comes to high-level collegiate and professional baseball. Virtually everyone can go opposite field homer. And so the rules have changed of the basic game. So now we have pitches that are designed to go over there or over there or over there. I don't have to throw the fastball to all those locations. I need to use the fastball for what it is. It's supposed to be fast. It's supposed to speed you up. And then off of that, I'm going to throw a bunch of other stuff that goes to the areas that covers the whole strike zone. I mean, there's a lot to that, but that's a lot of misinformation. The idea, one of the things that's out there in the world, Driveline Baseball did a study, an investigation of effective velocity, and miraculously came to the conclusion that it wasn't very effective, and that pitch sequencing is more art than it is science, which I find very ironic that the science-based company comes to the conclusion that it's art versus science, when virtually every bit of it is science from my perspective, and measurable. And especially hard hit balls. Like Carlos and I made a prediction, Carlos Pena, on national television before the first pitch of the 2017 postseason. We predicted how all the hard hit balls were going to happen. And it's not any kind of mysticism. It's the idea that they always happen exactly the same way. 50% of all hard hit balls happen within 6 EV miles an hour of the last pitch. And Driveline found that this was really a misnomer. In reality, we actually counted them. Like after the homers were hit, there were 104 homers hit, for example. 51 of them, which is almost 50%, 49%. So we missed it within 1 percentage point or 2 in each category that we guessed. So when the season, or when the whatever period that you're looking at is over, if it's a week, if it's a month, if it's a season, if it's 10 years, I don't care. Every single study that I've done, and it's in the thousands, they always come out exactly the same way. 50% of all the hard hit balls happen within 6 EV miles an hour of the last pitch. 20% of all hard hit balls happen when pitches are thrown without a tunnel, so that hitter can identify them. 20% of the hard hit balls happen when pitchers throw fastballs, basically, in this area, or they throw pitches that are in what's called the attention zone. So if I'm going to face Blake Snell and I know he throws 97, but he lives away, then my attention is going to go to that outside fastball speed. So I'm going to walk to the plate ready to hit 94. I'm not going to walk to the plate ready to hit 100. I'm going to walk to the plate ready to hit 94. So all the pitches within 6 EV miles an hour of that 94 down to like 87, 86, or 88, is those pitches in that speed range are at risk every time you throw them, because that's where the hitter lives. That's where they stay most of the time. And so 20% of hard hit balls happen like that, where you're just throwing it directly into the speed that the hitter's the most prepared to hit. And then 10% happen where they earn it, meaning pitches are coming out of a tunnel, pitches are creating more than 6 EV miles an hour between them. That's how 10% of hard hit balls happen. So out of those homers that were hit, I think it was 11% ended up being earned, and the other 89% were exactly as we predicted. So somehow Driveline came up with some kind of intrinsic run values or something that disproved what we actually literally counted at the end of the day. At the end of the day, there was 104 homers hit, and they happened exactly the same way that we said they would, as did all the other hard hit balls in that series. So we physically counted them and added the EV to each pitch, because you can't look at EV and get an honest evaluation unless A, you use the right EV miles per hour calculations. In their study, they did not. They used, number one, they used only one calculation. Every speed, 60 all the way up to 100, has its own EV adjustment. They used one adjustment for all speeds. And then also they used they used Zan Barksdale's version of, and I mean, Zan was trying to do, he actually gave EV a lot of credit, but he did an online thing, and they took their information as to what EV miles an hour equaled from his presentation. And his presentation got it a little bit wrong. He used what's called a time unit, and he just put miles per hour in there. So instead of being 2.5 miles an hour, he used 1 mile an hour. And so every one of their numbers is going to be off. There's no way to have an accurate reading without getting the accurate EV mile per hour adjustment values. So that's one of those misnomers too, is
Sure.
that EV miles per hour is off, and it's
Perry, I want to ask this because I think, I don't want to keep you on all day, obviously, and we're coming close. We got about 10 or 15 more minutes. But I want to, something that's important. And Mark Fuller mentioned that, when it comes to drills, to teach, hitters, especially, how to adjust to the different timing aspects. Can you talk about that?
I kind of swore off of hitting for a little while, because there are lots of things you can do, and I don't want to say that I won't talk about it at all, but I kind of swore off of it because I kept hearing all these things online, and I kept hearing all these things from hitting instructors all over. We've got 1,000 Twitter battles about this whole lead arm thing. And at the end of the day, when pitchers wake up, hitting is going to get very difficult. And yes, there are some definite things that you can do to combat it. But right now, hitters are not training in that fashion. For the most part, they are trying to keep it as simple as possible. You hear it all the time, trying to hit the ball the other way. They're trying to let the ball get deep. And for the most part, pitchers are bending over backwards to make that happen. The second they stop doing that, there's going to be some issues in hitting. So yes, there are a lot of things that you can do, but hitters have to completely revamp the way they think. It's a new paradigm for hitters. For pitchers, all you have to do is change where you throw pitches and change the sequencing. But none of that is weird. It's going to feel different, but you don't have to change the way you think completely. You just have to relocate. With hitters, though, you have to do some things differently. You have to train differently. You have to look at hitting differently.
And Perry, one of the training's got to be visual.
Absolutely.
I know
I realized when I was doing the patents, and I realized what was going to have to happen in the future, we started focusing a lot on that. And so recognizing spins and recognizing different things that are happening is going to be a huge part of the future of training hitters.
Is there something?
We get into that a lot.
And
After
I know
a few months of teaching pitchers how to stop hitting bats. That was the title of my last one, was to stop hitting bats. When pitchers stop hitting bats and the hitting struggles for a little while, we'll come back and we'll address the hitting side.
We'll do a specific one just for hitting. How's that?
Yeah.
That'll be awesome. Hey, someone's gonna throw you a big curveball here. John Golding from California, high school coach. I mean, you've probably been asked this before. I mean, what happens when the electronic strike zone comes in? Does this really change, or we just stay the same?
No, the strike zone does nothing. The strike zone really means nothing. I mean, when you think about it, it changes with every umpire, it changes with every hitter. The Altuve and the guy that's 6'8" is very different, the strike zone. And so at the end of the day, it's not one thing. Mm-hmm. Even though, honestly, I hope that never happens. I hope they do it like they do in tennis, where they give a pitcher, the umpire still calls it, but if the hitter gets a challenge and when he misses it, he doesn't get it anymore. And the pitcher gets a few challenges, however many is appropriate, I don't know yet. But when they're gone, they're gone. And so you still have the human element, but you can fix it to some degree. So I hope that's what happens, rather than going completely to it looked like a farce when you see how that worked in some of the trials, at least from my perspective. But it doesn't matter, honestly, because hitters are going to do what hitters are going to do. They're going to chase pitches outside the strike zone, and they're going to swing at pitches that look like they are strikes. And so whatever the strike zone is, EV is at work. It doesn't matter if the strike zone's this big. On one side of the strike zone, it's gaining speed, and on the other side, it's losing speed. So whatever you have to work with, it's still EV is still at work.
Mm-hmm. Greg Bronze asks, is there any truth to the science behind the height of the pitcher? The smaller the height, pitchers are more effective at throwing higher in the zone.
This was something I told everybody back in 2004. Start drafting 5'5" guys that throw hard and have good changeups. That's because the lower the pitcher gets. When I first introduced this to the Astros in 2004, Roy Oswalt immediately lowered his release point. And when you take his release point and you pause it, and then you have him stand up, his release point is just a little bit above where a fast pitch softball pitcher would be. Meaning he got so low that his 97-100 mile an hour fastball could actually tunnel with his 70 mile an hour curveball. And the curveball could actually be right at the very bottom of the strike zone. So he's literally throwing a little bit uphill in order to create more illusion. So the idea of lowering the mound, not going to work. It's going to back.
Sí, estoy acá.
Hang on. Hey, guys, mute.
Dale, vos ya estás en la esquina.
Pablo, mute, please. I think it's Pablo.
Bueno.
Argentina. Buenos Aires, Argentina. Thank you. Go ahead, Perry.
So shorter pitchers have more potential for hiding pitches. I mean, there are guys that, in my opinion, if they use this top of the strike zone, would be really effective, way more than if they're trying to get that sinker to get to the bottom of the strike zone. That's another misnomer. Low spin fastballs at the bottom of the strike zone do not perform better. Actually,
that's another question. Ian McDonald basically had asked, and we'll let you. What we'll do is take this last question, and then we'll let you finish it off, Perry, with anything else, and then we'll close it off. Based on your research, when pitching up in the zone, does spin rate have any impact on the pitcher's ability to be successful?
I mean, it does for sure, because high spin is going to keep the ball on a line longer. So it's still going to sink eventually. And so is it better to throw high spin at the top of the zone? Yes. But throwing low spin at the bottom of the zone, unless you couple it, like if you throw a 4-seam fastball and you throw a 2-seam sinker and you do the EV speeds right and you use the tunnel right, they can work in tandem. But if you're focusing on, just because you have a low spin rate, you're throwing it at the bottom of the strike zone, that's a farce. It does not outperform the top of the strike zone. Even though throwing a low spin is going to have a little more sink than the high spin one is, sometimes a lot actually. It's not the most important factor. The most important factor, because EV figures that in. If your ball sinks to here versus, ending up here, the EV miles per hour here is higher than the EV miles per hour here is. And so there's a correlation. The greatest fastball in the history of Major League Baseball probably has the lowest spin rate of any fastball. R.A. Dickey threw 5 different types of knuckleballs, and one of his knuckleballs was a fastball. It was about 80 to 82, and it had virtually no spin, and he had about a 43% swing and miss rate. And guys will say, well, yeah, that's because it's a knuckleball and that doesn't really count. Well, science is science, and if science says that spin is everything, then it should work every single time. As soon as you find one example where it doesn't work, it's no longer science. It may be a good hypothesis, but it's not science. Rick Porcello, when he won the Cy Young, had a really low spin rate, but yet he elevated fastballs way more than the year before and won over 20 games. So spin is one of those things that, yes, it can help you if you know how to use it. Like getting too much spin on a slider or curveball, if you've got too much movement, you can't hide pitches in the strike zone. So there are limits to all of that. And so you have to be careful as to how you describe it. It's basically, the idea is there's a perfect way to do it. Everybody has a perfect way to do it. And some guys, movement and spin is hurting them. It's hurting them more than it's helping them. That's a hard thing to get people to understand, because they work their butt off to try to get more fastball velocity. But if they're using the velocity in ways where it's losing EV miles an hour, it doesn't do any good. And if you have so much spin that the ball can't tunnel with the fastball and stay in the strike zone, then that allows a hitter that understands game planning a slight advantage.
Awesome. Hey, Perry, let's close it off with, kind of everything we've talked about a little bit, some last minute advice with EV.
Understand it. Get the real understanding of it, because without that understanding, let me see if I got any pearls here at the end. This is one of those things that kind of shows what the actual distance and the difference is. You see all the barrels. This is 3 pitches overlaid with a James Madison, really good hitter, freshman hitter. And this is a changeup, fastball, middle in, fastball up and in. And you look at where these balls are in space. If you think that 10 miles an hour is not accurate, just do the math on where this pitch is actually at as his bat is getting to the hitting zone for this changeup. And when you look at this, I think, what is it, 6 foot between here and here? That's a huge differential. And so that's one of those things that is kind of a myth. Garrett Cole's one of the guys that when he went over to the Astros, that Brent asked me to do kind of a makeover. I have no idea if Garrett ever understood that what he was trying to accomplish was effective velocity, but he didn't buy in all the way, but he did make a couple of adjustments, and he used his fastball, like as you can see right here, it's at about that 98 speed range. And when he's really good is when he's using that up higher, because the speed immediately goes up. And it's the second I get to 101, you can just see where all of the different locations of where I'm using it as to how it gets used. These are the 2 homers that he gave up against lefties in that World Series. And the batting average against, the hard hit balls against, and his fastball was hit at 500 with a hard hit ball rate of 500. And the answer is because it's at the speed that the radar gun says it is, or it's being used a little too often out there. So even the most elite pitcher in the game, when he starts to get away from EV rules, he becomes a little bit more vulnerable. It's just simple as that. When he's firing on all cylinders, which I've never seen him 100%, which is a scary thing to think about. But when he's living at 101 to 104 and using the pitches at their absolute max efficiency level, and it's like using a tool. I can hammer a nail in with a bunch of different tools, right? But only the hammer works the best. I can use a shovel, but it's not a great use of that shovel. My fastball use is best right here and used to get chases and used occasionally as a freeze. But if I'm not using it in that fashion, then I'm blurring it. I'm starting to blur my pitches together. So if I throw a slider at 93, 92, and I throw this fastball at 96, 97 all day long, they start to get closer together, and guys have they see that little bit of an opening.
Well, I'll tell you what, we said it was going to be gold. This was platinum, man. This was awesome. Unbelievable show. I know, Perry, we could keep going, but everybody's got stuff to do, and we got a schedule also to keep on the show. Listen, my friend, on behalf of everybody that joined us on Zoom and also live on Facebook, I want to thank you for your time. You're so generous with your time, and you got great stuff, man.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate all you guys' attention, and hopefully check out the membership stuff and the online courses at either you can go effective velocity with the dash.com or hittingasaguest.com.
Absolutely. And we'll have all that on the show notes. Check out the website. It is incredible. Got great stuff. And again, Perry is available to answer questions. Also, send him an email. You see his email up there, his website. Folks, thanks for in the U.S. and around the world. Thanks for joining our show. Special thanks to Perry Husband. Special thanks to our producer, Brian Kroc, the Lineup Media Group. I want to apologize slightly for the issues at the beginning that we had. Again, we tried to be ready for this as best we could. There were a couple issues, but we will take care of those for the future. Remember, tomorrow, 7 p.m. Central Time, Dr. Glenn Fleisek of the ASMI.org will be talking pitching, recovery, injuries. There's a lot of great stuff there. Join us again back here, 7 p.m. Let us know if you need the link. Just email me at caliendo19@gmail.com. This is a show that loves to interview baseball's best coaching minds who love to challenge the status quo. I'm your host, Pete Caliendo. I cannot thank you enough for joining us. Special thanks to all our guests. You're the ones that make our show. Please spread the show. Let people know about it. It's all we ask. Everything's free. God bless all. Stay safe for now, and we'll see you on the baseball field very soon.
Thanks, Pete.
Perry, thanks, buddy.
Do you want me to stay on?
Yeah, stay on. Go ahead. Let me just see. Hang on, let me just shut this up. Do you want to stop iCloud recording? If you ask, receive an email notification when the cloud recorder is ready.